Hello everybody, this is Mr. Rob and welcome back to episode number 96 of the Houston Astros Franchise here on MLB The Show 20. Today we will have the series finale. It is the series recap, season recap here for the Houston Astros, the last episode for this game, as we will be wrapping up MLB The Show 20 and just kind of talking about what the team did this year, as well as touching up on what would have happened if we would have gone into the offseason. So if you're excited for this one, make sure you leave a like and subscribe down below, especially if you want more franchise content. You can see the instructions on the screen. That's all you gotta do. Turn the red button to the gray button, hit the notification bell. Now also, before we begin, this is a live comp, so I'll be talking as the screen goes. So I'll just plug this real quick. If you want to follow me, get up with any sort of news that I drop, follow me on Twitter. It's on the screen now. That's where you can interact with me, talk to me, and we can talk and catch up and get all the news on what the schedule looks like for the week. So now that's all the way, let's just kind of jump in to what's happened. So we just saw the World Series last episode. We also saw the Yankees capture their first title since 2009 when they beat the Dodgers in a 4-game sweep. It was a crazy World Series. They went back-to-back jacks to take the lead in that Game 4. It was an exciting one to watch. You can take a look at that one. It'll be at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Stick around. So our Houston Astros, they finished 101-61 this year. They won the AL West. We unfortunately got bounced in the ALCS, but that was an improvement over year one. The Astros in year one in 2020 went 89-73 and did not make the postseason, but it was a Game 6 loss to the Yankees this year. But we played pretty well. I was proud of the squad overall, so we'll just kind of jump into player stats. Unfortunately, since I am in the postseason, like all the league leaders don't show up and the team rankings, I can't really talk about them, but I will talk about the player stats for everybody and kind of break it up into positions because it's easier for me to sort. So we'll start off with starting pitchers. Take a look at who did what for the year. We'll start off with Justin Verlander, the old vet, the two-time Cy Young winner. He had a pretty solid season. He went .336 ERA, 15-7 in his age 38 season. Don't know if he would have retired or not, but if you remember, we stuck with him this season. It was either him or Greinke at the beginning of the year. I only wanted to bring one back, and we brought back Verlander, and I think we made a pretty solid choice. He was reliable. He pitched pretty solid in the postseason. Be very curious to see if he came around to the 2022 season. Up next, we'll talk about Lance McCullers, because he was kind of the number 2 starter. McCullers was very disappointing in the series. He has an 87 overall, but don't let that fool you. He went .422 ERA during the regular season. In the postseason, he pitched a .972 ERA through 8 1/3 innings. So McCullers was not very good. He had a 12-8 record in his 179 innings, a 1.5 WHIP, .422 ERA. Not a good season. He would be a free agent after this year as well, so I do not think he would be brought back if we did do a year 3. Next on the list, we'll talk about Jose Urquidy, who did not have a good playoffs as well, 6.48 ERA, but he was a very solid surprise this series. He was probably one of my sleeper, I would say, top stars overall. He had a very good 2020. You can see 2.49 ERA, and he had a 1.25 WHIP, and he actually dropped the WHIP this year despite the ERA going up to 3.24. But for 25 years old, with 2 very solid years of experience, I mean, Urquidy would be a mainstay in this rotation for years to come. So I love pitching with Urquidy. He was very fun to pitch with. I thought he had very good command of his pitches, and Urquidy would probably be the number 2 rotation guy next year. Then we'll talk about Musgrove. He came over at the deadline from Pittsburgh. He had a 5.40 ERA, but he pitched very well for us in game, I think, number 4. I think it was number 4 against the White Sox in the ALDS. It was either 4 or 5. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he pitched very strong. He had a 3.44 ERA. Definitely pitched better in Pittsburgh, as I think his ERA was in the low 3s when we traded for him. So he didn't do very good in Houston, but I mean, I thought it was a pretty solid acquisition at the deadline. He would probably stick around for next season, considering we have team control over him. And the last guy who made up the rotation was Rogelio Armenteros. Very interesting story. Did not have a very good 2020. In the postseason, he was not the starter. He got relegated to the bullpen, but he pitched so good in the bullpen, he actually made a start against the Yankees and pitched phenomenal. So what an up and down season for Rogelio Armenteros. You can see 5.56 ERA in the regular season, but he had such a good playoffs that, I mean, you can't deny it. He's 25 years old. Probably won't never be a more than like a number 4, number 5 rotation guy, but he still has room to grow. And I actually overall did enjoy pitching with Rogelio as well. Then it's on to the bullpen, which, you know, in this series, really no secret. The bullpen is really where we struggled throughout. We had a very rough bullpen. We tried to make lots of moves, tried to shore it up, but never really had consistency there. And I think that's probably what kept us from winning a World Series in this series. I think we would have had a good bullpen. We definitely would have gotten over the hump and brought a title to Houston. But nonetheless, we did not. So let's take a look at them real quick. We'll start off with the best player out of the bullpen, I think, this season, despite his 6.23 ERA in the playoffs. And that was Chris Devenski. Devenski had a 2.67 ERA in the regular season, and he was the go-to guy. Pitched 84 1/3 innings, his most innings pitched since 2016, which was his best season as a reliever. He didn't have a good 2020, so it was good to see him bounce back. He'd take over as that go-to middle of the inning, eating up rotation guy or bullpen guy. I thought he played very well. Alex Reyes, another very interesting story, 7.11 ERA. Definitely blossomed in that last game against New York, but he pitched pretty good in the playoffs. I would say he was the best reliever for the playoffs, which isn't saying necessarily much, but he was acquired at the deadline last year from Arizona, and despite an 8 potentially, never lived up to it. You can see the ERAs on the right side of your screen. 5.71 ERA, 1.46 whip, 6.90 last year. 26 years old, so he is running at a time. I do think maybe in the offseason would have tried to move on from Alex Reyes and just kind of abandon that whole project. Now, the best guy in our bullpen, who paid both reliever and closing pitcher this year, is Ryan Presley. You can see 1.5 ERA here, and the season he had a 1.47 ERA, 0.96 whip, so arguably put up his best season. One of the best relievers in baseball. You can see he took over for the closer role once we made the Osuna trade at the deadline, so he got 28 saves. Ryan Presley would also be a free agent after this year, and he would like pretty solid money, so he would have been a guy we definitely would have tried to bring back despite the cost. Also in the bullpen, we have a Jose Urena, who was our first real big trade of the series. We acquired him last May from Miami. He was a former opening day guy for the Marlins, and he just kind of fell in as that long reliever spot starter. He didn't have a good season this year, 5.02 ERA, 89 2/3 innings pitched. He had a better 2020, but Jose Urena, I thought the trade made sense at the time. Don't know what the future would have held for him. Then we have Austin Pruitt, who's just kind of like that guy who just fills the spot in the bullpen. Never really pitched very good, 3.52 ERA. This was definitely his best season, despite his whip being a 1.30. But, you know, kind of has capped out his ceiling already. And then Edubre Ramos, who was absolutely atrocious in the playoffs. He got rocked. 3 innings, and he gave up, like, an insane amount of runs. So, definitely a bust in the postseason. We acquired him from the Dodgers at the deadline this season when we traded Josh James to them, and he pitched good in the regular season, just did not translate to the postseason with his 2.84 ERA and his 1.37 whip. And the guy listed as our closer who was lights out in the postseason was Brad Hand. We signed him to a 1-year deal at the start of the season to potentially be the closer replacement for Osuna whenever he was dealt. He never really took over for the closer spot in the regular season, but in the playoffs he was the closer and he was lights out. He had a 3 ERA, 0.92 whip. He would also be a free agent, so he would be an interesting one to see if he was brought back. So that's the pitching side of things. Now we'll go back to what our sweet spot was, and that was our hitters. We had a very good offense this series. I mean, the names on the team you would expect: Altuve, Springer, Correa, Alvarez. I mean, this is a hitting squad. Oh, of course, the MVP this season, Alex Bregman. How can I forget him? So we'll start off with the hitter, starting off with catcher, which is coincidentally our weakest spot hitting. We had more defensive catchers between Garrett Stubbs and Maldonado. We'll start off with Garrett Stubbs, who was the start of the season as the platoon catcher. He would hit against righty pitchers, but he had a pretty solid season, so he eventually got promoted to starting catcher every day. One point his average was in the 270s. It eventually capped out at 239 to end the season, but he had his career high in homers and RBIs. 10 homers, 56 RBIs. He is still improving, but as you can see by his attributes, he's more of a defensive catcher, which, when you have so much talent other places, it's hard to pay everybody. So I think Stubbs would be a nice solid fit for the future. The other catcher was Martin Maldonado, which if you go back to way early in the series, he was the guy I was saying was the surprise breakout. He started the series hitting like in the 330s, just hitting bombs in April and May of 2020, and you can see the average last year and this year, he just fell apart. 238 last year, 220 this year. He was in the 100s for most of this year. Eventually just got benched to be the backup catcher and didn't really recover. He would definitely not be brought back next year, but that's really the story of Maldonado. At first base, we have Josh Bell, our biggest trade of the series. We traded Roberto Osuna and Yuli Gurriel to the Pirates for Josh Bell in an attempt to clean up our image thanks to Osuna's checker pass. And we got the first baseman of our future. You can see 94 overall, 8 potential, who can hit some bombs. If it weren't for Bregman winning MVP for this team, I think Bell would have got talked about so much more. He had 316 average, over 1,000 OPS, 43 homers, 111 RBIs. I mean, he was sensational this season. He just didn't really get the credit because he was playing on the other side of the infield from Bregman. But one more season of team control. It doesn't show it here, but you can see 5 years of service. He would definitely be our first baseman of the future. He'd be somebody we had to think about next offseason. Then we had Justin Smoke. He started off as the platoon first baseman with Gurriel, picked up on a 1-year deal in the offseason, but once Gurriel was traded and we acquired Bell, he just kind of became a backup. He had 234 homers and 11 RBIs, but he is from South Carolina. He is a former Gamecock, so that's always a plus. Second base, Jose Altuve, the former 2017 AL MVP, definitely kicked it back up a notch after a struggle of a 2020. He had 323 homers, 64 RBIs, and got back to his form, which was great because having Altuve at that leadoff spot, setting the tone, just an awesome player. And then Jack Mayfield was the backup middle infielder to end the season. You can see his average 302, so he hit good in his appearances, solidifying that spot as a backup utility infielder. Third base, the best player on the team, the AL MVP from this season, Alex Bregman. So many times he came up clutch at the plate, just so many times we could count on him. You can see his averages here: 329, 1.047 OPS, 41.6 OBP. He had 49 homers and 133 RBIs, career highs in both. Well deserving of an MVP season, and considering what he's getting paid for the next couple years, that's almost a steal. And he's only 27 years old, so he would definitely, obviously, be the cornerstone of the future. Shortstop, one player they're not showing here, they're showing Diaz because he got hurt, was Carlos Correa. Definitely missed in the playoff run. He got hurt back in, I think, like August, considering he only played 111 games. Definitely would have liked to have him for the playoffs. You can see his average is 286, 865 OPS, 22 homers, 88 RBIs. He was on pace to hit his career high in homers. Probably got his career high in RBIs as well. So it was a big blow to our offense, and he would have been a free agent this year, and you can see what he's commanding, $30.5 million. So he would not be a cheap penny. But considering he's only 26 years old, 8 potential, 86 overall, we would have done everything in our power to keep Carlos Correa. So with his injury, we relied on Elizmus Diaz to be our shortstop, and he was very bad in the postseason. You can see he hit 121. He did have a couple clutch hits though with 5 RBIs, but he had a pretty solid bounce back season after a horrible 2020. He had 264, 4 homers, 27 RBIs. Actually started off the season in AAA, so it was good to see the veteran from Cuba bounce back. Then we head to the outfield, starting off with left field, where we have Yordan Alvarez, who spent most of his time at DH in this series, despite playing some outfield from time to time, and probably the brightest young player of this series, the 2019 Rookie of the Year, is only 23. He had a pretty down year by his standards. His average did go up, but his OPS dropped, his slugging dropped, and his OBP dropped. And he hit 32 homers, 102 RBIs, played in every single game for the second straight season. When you're a DH, that's pretty easy to do, but obviously Yordan Alvarez, another cornerstone of this team. Then we have Avisel Garcia, who played a lot of left field, specifically in the postseason. Who can forget that pinch hit grand slam in Game 2 of the ALDS against the White Sox. He was acquired in the offseason when we traded away Zach Greinke, and he delivered. We had a very much logjam in the outfield spot, and Garcia was playing pretty good. You just had to find a spot for him. He had 262 on the season, 11 homers, 55 RBIs. Definitely just became the left fielder once Brantley was traded. And he is a free agent, though, so it would have been very interesting to see what happened with Garcia. Center field, George Springer hit 225 in the postseason, but had a pretty solid year overall. 303 average, that's a career high. 940 OPS, 26 homers, 71 over RBIs. He was the big free agent after year one, and re-signed him to a 3-year, $36 million contract. So obviously a good investment. Be very interesting to see how that investment goes over time, though, with Bell being a free agent in 2 years and Correa being a free agent next year. So his story would have been fun to follow for a couple more seasons. Then we have Mark Canha, who was the biggest free agent signing this past year. You can look to the trade of Greinke. You can look at the signing of Hand. You can look at a couple of other spots. But Mark Canha, a late free agent signing, a World Series champion last year with the Athletics. They did not re-sign him. I don't know why they didn't re-sign him. So we picked him up, and you cannot deny this guy's hitting talent. He had 318 this season, only played in 100 games, had his career best in OPS, and in those 100 games, in about 200 less at-bats, he was 3 home runs shy of his career high. 30 home runs, 75 RBIs. You cannot deny this guy a spot every single day. Unfortunately, he did not play very good in the playoffs. We probably could have used him a lot more. He only had 10 at-bats, but Canha was a phenomenal piece of the offense. Then we have Miles Straw, who was the basically designated pinch runner with that 94 speed. He did very good in his hitting this year, surprisingly. 324, 3 homers, 21 RBIs. But kind of like I said, just that logjam in the outfield. Somebody's going to get the short end of the stick. And in the majors, it was Miles Straw. Right field, we have Josh Reddick, who was the right fielder of last year as well, before he was dealt to St. Louis. He had a big contract last year, so we traded him, and then the offseason we picked him right back up, and he hit 287, 6 homers, 22 RBIs in his 67 games. He didn't start every day, but Reddick's just been a nice solid hand in the outfield. He probably wouldn't be brought back next year, but we got to see a lot of Josh Reddick. So that's it with our player stats. I do want to take a couple look at some of our former players in the series from first year, just to see how they did with their new team. We're going to start with Zach Greinke, who was our number 2 last year with Verlander. We traded him to the Brewers before the season started for Lorenzo Cain, who we flipped for prospects, and Avisail Garcia. And he put together a pretty decent campaign, 3.56 ERA, 1.13 WHIP. He went 9-13. Didn't pitch 200 innings for the first time since 2016, so you can see a little bit of fall off from Greinke. If we had to keep one between Verlander and Greinke, I think we picked the right one, if I do say so myself. Staying with pitchers, we'll go to Los Angeles, who had Josh James. Josh James was probably the biggest bust of the series. He had A potential. He was 27 years old, and he's in his 80s. He just never clicked. That 57 control just never was enough for me. And eventually I just lost my patience with him. Hit 7.78 ERA last year, 5.99 this year. We traded him at the deadline for Ramos when the Dodgers initiated a trade with us, and I just dumped him. And it doesn't look like the Dodgers really used him. He didn't get any innings in the postseason. To the bullpen side of things with the Pirates, when we made the blockbuster move to trade Roberto Osuna in that Bell-Gurriel trade. He was the best closer in the league, and we traded him because, this is an Astros team. Remember, they got busted for cheating a couple years ago. And Osuna doesn't have the best history, so I think for a team willing to clean up their image, it'd make a statement to trade Osuna. So we did. He put together arguably his best season, 2.01 ERA, 38 saves, 62 2/3 innings. Pirates have themselves a solid closer. We just didn't want to deal with the extra baggage. Speaking of the Pirates, another guy that got in that trade was Gurriel, and you can see what's happened to Gurriel. He got all the way down to Double-A. Talk about regression. Our first baseman last season definitely fell off a cliff. 241 ERA average, only 4 homers and 295 at bats. Looks like we traded Gurriel at the perfect time because he definitely fell off a cliff all the way down to a 63 overall. That's something. We'll stick with the Pirates because remember we also traded Michael Brantley over to them when we picked up Joe Musgrove. He had a not very good 2020. He was our leadoff hitter for a lot of last year, but we stuck with him this year despite the logjam in the outfield. And he started off the year hot in the 300 average wise. He was hitting some home runs, knocking in some batters, but he started to fall off, and so we traded him to Pittsburgh and ended up hitting 263, 12 homers, 40 RBIs. The last player we'll take a look at, we saw him in the World Series, was also for the Dodgers, and that is right fielder Yasiel Puig. Now, we had Puig last year for a total of 39 games. Once we traded Josh Reddick to St. Louis, we needed a new right fielder, so we picked up Puig from the free agency, gave him like a second chance, and he did good with us last year. 298 average, 6 homers, 20 RBIs, but kind of like Osuna, Puig doesn't have the best history, so I think it benefited both. So we got us a right fielder for a season. Puig got a second chance, so we let him test free agency, and he signed a 2-year, $11 million contract with the Dodgers, so he was their return back to LA, got to the World Series. He had 258, 25 homers, 67 RBIs, so good to see Puig kind of resurrect his career. And that's going to do it for most of this episode. With the player stats, I did kind of want to take a look at what next offseason would have looked like, because it probably would have been a very exciting offseason. If you look at who's on our contracts, obviously we have most of our big stars locked up for a long period of time, specifically Springer, Bregman, and Altuve. But if you were to look ahead, free agents for this season, Josh Bell, I think he's under team control, so I actually would just go over the ones who aren't under team control. Correa would be a big free agent. We have to bring back Correa. McCullers is a free agent. Presley would have been a free agent. Brad Hand, Avisel Garcia, Justin Verlander, Brad Peacock, Mark Hanna. I think Diaz, yeah, he was under team control. Chris Dedinsky, Justin Smoke, Martin Maldonado, Josh Reddick, even Joe Smith, who we saw for most of a season and a half. It would have been a lot of free agents this year, and we had to see who would have brought back, so it would have been a very exciting offseason. Unfortunately, MLB The Show 21 did not have year-to-year saves, so this is where this series ends. I'm sorry we couldn't bring a World Series. We'll keep trying in the Indian Series, which if you haven't started following it, go check that out. We're in the month of May, so you haven't missed much, but I would watch that series. That is our MLB The Show 21 series. That's going to do it here for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. 96 episodes. It's crazy to look back on. This is really the second series I've wrapped up, so it's been a pleasure to play this one for a year and 3 months. It dragged on a little longer than I would have liked, but I thank you guys so much for sticking around. I'll see you guys in MLB The Show 21. Y'all have a good rest of your day. This is Mr. Rob. I'll see you in the next one.